This is Toddophonic Todd here with one of my musical heroes, Todd Rundgren. I'm very excited about this. Todd is currently on tour. He'll be performing tonight, actually, at the Gramercy Theatre in Manhattan. And for this interview, we're going to concentrate on the early days with the Nazz. And my first question is, how did a kid growing up in Upper Darby, Pennsylvania, become such an Anglophile?
Well, part of it was the hair, I think. Before I had ever heard the Beatles, I was in the library at school, and they had a Time magazine. There was a little tiny article about this band that was making a big sensation in England, and they couldn't describe the music, but they did make a big deal about the fact that they had these long hair, what they call pudding bowl haircuts, but they had their hair long. And there's a picture of me when I'm about like 3 or 4 years old, of me and my dad in a barber shop with the barber and the policeman standing behind me while I am screaming my guts out because I so hated the process of getting my hair cut that a policeman had to come into the barber shop to figure out what all the racket was about. So when the Beatles came out, I thought, long hair, I'm going for that. I hadn't heard a note of the Beatles music, but the long hair thing was definitely where I was going. And then when I was in high school, I think there was a girl in my class who subscribed to a bunch of English music papers, like and the NME and a couple other things. And so I was reading about all these bands and stuff even before I had ever heard them. And I just got hooked on the whole idea of being in an English band, or at least pretending.
Right.
That I was.
Yeah, I know a lot of U.S. bands in the 60s were trying to get the British records as quickly as they could, sort of the same way that the British kids were scarfing up the American soul R&B and girl group records. Were you trying to get your hands on as much of the music as you could?
Well, yeah, I probably, before the Yardbirds or the Who were any sort of phenomenon, I had those records just because I would hear a single and get hooked on the sound, on the energy, on the whole idea of being like in a quartet or a quintet or something like that, instead of being like Elvis in front of a Las Vegas orchestra, which was where American music was going.
Mm-hmm.
It was like some pretty boy and a bunch of backing musicians, and the whole English thing was like 4 or 5 guys who you knew all their names, and they were all kind of considered equals, even if they weren't all contributing equally.
Yeah, and a lot of those pretty boys were actually coming out of Philadelphia.
Oh, yeah, Fabian, I remember the story of Fabian, just some record producer who was walking down the street thinking, I got to have some handsome guy.
Yeah.
Saw him sitting on a stoop somewhere and didn't even know he could sing, which he couldn't. So they made a star out of him,
Yeah. And
but there were some legitimate,
right.
actually talented musicians who came out of Philadelphia. Bobby
definitely.
Rydell was
Yeah.
a talented guy,
Yeah, Charlie Gracie predated those guys, but he's he still plays around and he's still great.
Yeah.
Yep.
No, I mean, Philadelphia produced a lot of incredible music. Unfortunately, we're only remembered for Chubby Checker.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned the Yardbirds a moment ago. Did you get the name The Nazz from their song The Nazz Are Blue?
That's actually where we got it, the B-side of Happenings 10 years time ago.
Right.
Yeah, we didn't know what it meant, but we just thought, we got to have some terse, like The Who, The Something, The Move. All those English bands were The Something. And we thought, the Nazz. It sounds cool, and we don't have to explain what it means, because we don't know.
Yeah. With The Who, you and a bassist by the name of Carson Van Osten went to their hotel in 1967 when they were in Philly, touring on promoting Happy Jack to hopefully run into them, and you did. It just strikes that, wow, those were different times when you could just go to, the hotel of a band like that and everybody would just be hanging out.
Yeah, well, for historical accuracy, it was me and Tom Mooney.
Okay.
But we tended to dress like we were in a band.
Mm-hmm.
And because we were in a band, but I made a big deal about dressing properly. And yeah, the Nazz got discovered because me and Tom Mooney were chatting up Roger Daltrey after a Who show at the Holiday Inn bar in Philadelphia. And a guy approached us and said, "You guys look like you're in a band." And we said, "Yes." And that was how the Nazz essentially got discovered.
Now,
just because of what we look like.
Now, where did you get those sharp clothes? Because you guys were definitely sharp dressers.
Well, at first, it was kind of catch as catch can. Not every shop in Philadelphia was caught up on what was happening in England, which was the style, of course, that we preferred. But if you were careful with your shopping dollar, then, you could find a shirt with extra large lapels,
right?
Or something with paisleys on it. At first we had to just kind of plunder whatever we could find. Some of it came out of a thrift store sometimes,
mm-hmm.
But eventually, once the Nazz became sort of official, the first thing we did was go to England and buy every piece of clothing we could find.
Did you perform there, or did you just go on a shopping trip?
Well, we had intended to record our first album there, but there was some sort of statute at a time between the American and English musicians unions that if you went to England to work, an English band had to come to the U.S. to work. And our manager had overlooked the paperwork for that thing. And so we went to England. We did one session at a brand new Trident Studios. And then the next day we were served with papers by the English Musicians Union saying we could not record or perform in England at all.
Damn.
So it suddenly turned into a shopping spree.
Yeah, it kind of sounds in a somewhat the way the Kinks had problems in America.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned The Move, who clearly a big influence on you with the Nazz, and of course in your solo career you recorded their song Do Ya. I was surprised when a live 1969 concert of theirs was released a few years ago and had versions of both Open My Eyes and Under the Ice, two Nazz songs. Were you aware?
No.
Yeah, so you didn't know they were doing those songs at the time?
No, not at the time. I found out much later, which is, extremely interesting factoid that two bands are tributing each other without either of them knowing it.
Right. Was it still somewhat of a thrill for you when you found out later? I imagine if you had, discovered it in '69, you would have been head over heels.
Yeah, but the irony is that I've never met either Roy Wood or Jeff Lynne.
Wow.
Everybody thinks that everybody in the music business knows everybody else.
Right.
But sometimes it's just a question of happenstance, whether you cross paths with somebody. I may even have been in the room with Jeff Lynne at one point, but we've never been introduced to each other. And so that whole, mystery co-tribute thing is still just hanging out there.
Yeah. In a way that almost seems cooler in a way, to me anyway. It
is, because it's kind of like, it would have been really fun if back in the day we had run into each other,
Sure.
When we were both still performing that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But nowadays so much water, so much other, kind of experiences have gone under the bridge.
Right.
That, you're kind of, you get blasé after a while.
Yeah, I can understand that. Going back once again, the British invasion a bit here, it seems that, at least on a certain level, Philadelphia was trying to resist it. One of the top DJs, Jerry Blavat, I think he pretty much refused to play British recordings, and I'm not sure some of the other hot DJs of that era, like High Lit or Georgie Woods, I don't think they were that gung-ho about it.
No, the other DJs jumped right on that.
Right.
You know, because I remember at the time what radio was like. Listen, I got no complaint with Jerry Blavat. We, kind of worshipped his show before the British invasion.
Mm-hmm.
Because, High Lit and the other guys, they were playing Frankie Avalon and all other really blanched white music
Mm-hmm.
up until that manufactured white flower kind of
Right.
music, before the British invasion came in, and Jerry Blavat was playing the real hardcore R&B.
Yeah, he still does.
That was the only thing worth listening to
Mm-hmm.
at the time. And so I don't blame him for sticking with that, because it was really the only thing worth listening to until the British invasion.
Right.
And so that was his brand, and he, had total right to stick to it.
Yeah, and that soul and R&B sound that was popular, it infused your music in Nazz somewhat, and especially your early solo career, I feel.
Yeah, it was like the music that I was listening to when I was growing up before the so-called British invasion. It had the same effect on Daryl Hall, had the same effect on a lot of white kids,
Yeah.
because Jerry Blavat was a white kid.
Mm-hmm.
We had that particular kind of quirk of geography in that Philadelphia is right on the Mason-Dixon line. And you get too much further south than that, and they call R&B race records. So only really low wattage radio stations that are meant for just black niche audiences are playing that music when you get too much further south in Pennsylvania. But we were right in that sweet spot where a white guy, can play all that music, and it doesn't get called race records, It's just music.
Right. Yeah, then you get, this was too far away, but then Pittsburgh had this whole crazy sound that was uniquely its own with all sorts of crazy doo-wop records that they still play down there today.
Yeah, well, that's, you're halfway to Cleveland.
Yep.
On that, and that is essentially the heart of white rock and roll.
Right. Now, prior
Once
to...
you get over there,
Yep. Yeah, where it was born, some would say, with Alan Freed. Prior to being in bands, did you hang out at the Jersey Shore a lot?
Actually, no.
Right.
Once in a while, when I was real young, my parents would take a trip to the shore.
Mm-hmm.
But not really, it would be like a day trip.
Yeah.
We go to Atlantic City for a day or something like that. I remember my dad went through a phase where he liked to fish, so he would go to Cape May or something
Mm-hmm.
like that.
Take a
little boat out, but that wasn't the same as walking the boardwalk. So, later on I would take, when I was older, I would take a bus and go down to Atlantic City or something like that. It wasn't until, we formed the Nazz that I actually ever visited Wildwood, New Jersey, which was kind of the northern equivalent of Fort Lauderdale in a way.
Right.
It was where like high school kids and stuff would go in the summertime to try and scam liquor and stuff.
Still do.
Hang out on the beach. Yeah. And I knew a guy up the street, some of my first kind of informal guitar lessons, and my inspiration for playing the guitar was a guy who lived up the street who was actually in a band who did regular gigs in the bars in the Jersey Shore.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I knew about it, but it wasn't the kind of gig you aspired to.
Right.
It was like playing standards in a bar, while it's better than, being a garbage man, it's kind of, as a musician, it isn't what you ultimately aspire to.
Right.
And that was the inspiration for Wildwood Blues, was the disconnect between the kind of old school band that would play in a dingy club on the Jersey Shore, a bunch of standards that everybody knew and could dance to. We were down there playing all this new English music and blues songs and stuff like that, and going over like a lead balloon, and not really making enough money to even rent a hotel room. We were sleeping on the tables in the bar.
Oh, boy. Probably subsisting on Max Pizza.
Yeah, so the reality of that experience was really, eye-opening in a way.
Yeah, I think you captured that in that song.
Yeah, Jersey Shore was never our thing.
Mm-hmm. I gotta ask you, changing topics somewhat, but as a baseball fan, I'm curious how you came up with the initial title of Fungo Bat for the second Nazz album.
No, that was the kind of I don't know where we came up with it. I just like the sound of Fungo Bat, but I was not a baseball fan at the time. Didn't know anything about baseball.
Right.
As a matter of fact, until my oldest son became a baseball prodigy, I didn't care about baseball at all, knew nothing about the game. And that's the only reason why I know anything about the game now.
Right.
And also, I never watched baseball because he's not playing anymore.
Yeah. So, many people...
Baseball has gone back to being the most boring game in the world to me.
Many people...
Next to soccer.
Thank you for adding that, Todd. I appreciate it. Many people, including myself, discovered the Nazz through the inclusion of Open My Eyes on Lenny Kaye's Nuggets compilation. Are you a fan of that album?
I'm a fan of Lenny.
Right.
Lenny is Lenny is the greatest, and anything Lenny does, I know is straight from the heart and really just all about the music. Lenny hasn't got a cynical bone in his body, and that's why I love him.
Yeah, you're spot on with that. Did your disappointment with the sound of the Nazz albums lead you to take your career more in your own hands from both a production and a performance standpoint when you embarked on your solo career?
Well, I don't know that we were necessarily disappointed with the sound of the records. I think we were disappointed that somehow, we felt like we never got the shot that we should have had.
Right.
And the band, in reality, only lasted about 18 months from start to finish before everything began to, to disintegrate. So I think that's why why people look at the band rightfully as something, phenomenological, as, coulda, woulda, shoulda, but, just never really attained the stature of the bands that we tried to emulate, like The Who or The Move or somebody like that.
Right.
But there was likely some sort of flaw in the concept to start with. When I put the band together, I still sort of thought I was still in the thrall of, the Beatles formula, which you thought that it could only be those four guys, and that each one had a unique contribution that made the sum greater than the parts. But reality is rarely like that, and indeed the Beatles weren't like that. It just kind of seemed that way because that's how they were presented. But, as we have come to realize historically, the main motivator was probably Paul, who was herding the rest of the cats, into this kind of formula that worked so well for them.
Right.
Well, after the Beatles broke up, you realized, how different everyone was musically. and how different their tendencies were musically. So the Nazz was just like the Beatles compressed into 18 months. I was kind of driving the whole thing, but in reality, it was something that just, the center could not hold. Eventually we were destined to break up.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that story isn't too dissimilar from a lot of bands in that era, although it seems like when you were together, I mean, if you were to think of, a 1960s band from Philadelphia, certainly the Nazz would probably be the first one to come to mind.
Well, we had at least the band that comes to mind for me is like the Soul Survivors.
Right.
Expressway to Your Heart. That would have been what Philadelphia might have contributed. We actually did.
And that was a more archetypical Philly sound than what you were doing.
Well, I'm not exactly sure, because what happened was, after that, our discovery in the bar of the Holiday Inn, we were immediately whisked off to like Long Island and New York. So all the music that we made was not made in Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
It was made in, our first album. The only 2 albums were recorded in L.A. We thought of ourselves as some sort of quasi-English band.
Mm-hmm.
So even though we came out of Philadelphia, we didn't create much while we were there.
It's been great talking to you about the Nazz, and hopefully maybe we can do this again and talk about your solo career and bring things more up to date. And speaking of bringing things up to date, you're currently on tour, and this very evening you're going to be performing at the Gramercy Theatre in Manhattan. I know you've got a great band with people such as Kasim Sultan and Prairie Prince in there. The set list is advertised as being comprised of fan favorites. How would those be chosen?
Well, they get chosen actually every evening.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a master list of about 50 songs.
Right.
That I think people would like to hear or may have requested, or that fit into a certain kind of setting, let's say.
So what happens if I go there tonight and yell out for Hang On Paul?
No, you will not get that. Not because we wouldn't be prepared to play it,
right,
but because I don't take requests. And I don't want people to ever think that I do.
But you know what your fans want to hear and what you're comfortable playing.
That's when I totally lose control.
Yeah.
It's when people start yelling it out and I just start playing it.
Mm-hmm.
But we have a master list of about 50 songs, and within an hour before the show, I write a new set every night. It usually begins the same way, but after that, it's just whatever I feel is going to work for a particular evening. And
I imagine that makes it a little more.
It's about 20 songs plus encores, so you can be pretty sure that maybe 10 of those songs will be familiar to you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not absolutely sure, but the whole idea is, this is a constant negotiation between me and my audience.
Which probably keeps it a little fresh and exciting for you, right? To be able to mix it up like that?
Well, that's the only thing that keeps it fresh and exciting, because this is material I've been performing for 40 years or so.
Right.
So, just at least not doing it in exactly the same order or the same selection of songs is what makes it challenging for me and the band. Because otherwise, I might as well just move to Las Vegas and play the same show every night for 200 nights a year.
Yeah, as others have done. Well, I'm definitely.
At least I wouldn't have to travel all the time.
Yeah. Well, Todd, I appreciate you so much coming on the air with me today. I know you're a very busy man. It's been an honor to have you, and I'm very much looking forward to the show tonight.
Terrific. Maybe we'll do this again in February.
All right. Take care, buddy.